Can you explain the concept of how honor works in the Middle East? Is it social culture or religious culture, and how does it apply?
Sure. Listen, that's an awesome question to ask. And I get this asked all the time. Spend 27 years in law enforcement, and a lot of people that I know around the country would run across some incidents where, a father had killed the daughter because he had been talking to another person who wasn't part of the same tribe, maybe from the same religion, or, they didn't have permission. There was an incident out in Arizona a few years back where a father actually caught his daughter walking in a mall parking lot with another male, and he just ran her over and killed her right there in the parking lot. And this whole concept of honor does contribute to the honor things. But one thing we have to make very clear is the fact that it is not a religious type of response. It is a cultural response. And the reason for that is in all of Middle Eastern cultures, especially in rural areas, or we call them villages, the concept of honor, sometimes it's more important than life itself, and is a collective effort to protect the honor of the family or the community. And if you think about it, a lot of these rural areas, or a lot of the villages, a lot of things really depend on reputation of the tribe, the reputation of the village, the reputation of the family, to the point where it affects marriages, it affects things such as business dealings, and a slew of different things, because really everything is based on reputation. So now when someone happens to violate that, would it be being promiscuous or not having permission to talk to a member of the opposite sex, it brings dishonor into the family, especially the parents, and it also has effects on any of the siblings, because they're all collectively looked at as being of the same culture and would partake in the same type of activities because they were taught by their parents. Okay, so it brings a lot of shame. And if you think about it, the best way to kind of give a little comparison to it is old school U.S., especially in the southern states, more conservative states. If someone in their 20s and 30s would act, something that was dishonorable, there would be a criminal, there would be stealing, or there would be cursing, there would always be a saying that says, your mama didn't raise you right. As you can tell, even here in the Western society, depending on what type of environment you're in, a lot of the things that a person does as an adult does reflect back on how they were raised, which basically dishonors their family. Except in the Middle East, and we're talking ranging from Eastern European bloc all the way out to Southeast Asia, Northern Africa, even though they practice different religions, some of these tribal codes, some of these tribal honor codes are pretty much the same. Now, keep in mind, we're not talking about modern cities like Abu Dhabi or Dubai or Beirut or places like that. When you get into the rural areas, in comparison would be like you wouldn't see that in New York City as often as you would see it in, let's say, rural Georgia. We're talking hundreds of miles from Atlanta, in these little small towns of 1,000, 2,000 people, because people's reputations are at stake in those smaller cities. In big cities, nobody really pays attention to what's going on. So once the shame is brought in onto the family, it affects the public standing of the family, the tribe, everything that basically surrounds their entire being, to the point that it affects their business. If they have a store, people are not going to shop at that store because they're going to look at that family as being dishonorable. The result of that is for them to basically wipe out the negativity. Some, and I say some, not all, will resort into actually killing the person who brought the dishonor. And this is where this honor come in, is because that is the only way to kind of like erase the negativity. That way it brings honor back to the family. And typically the is done by the father, the older members of the family, because they're the ones who are the guardians of maintaining that sanctity of that family. So you could see where it is a very, very rich culture, and it does have its purposes, even though from the Western lens, we're looking at it like, oh my God, why would they do something stupid like that? I mean, if the kid, the punishment is so harsh, we just have to look at it from a different lens. And it's hard for people in the Western society to understand that when the entire system in some of those communities literally relies on the reputation and honor that that specific tribe, community, or family has. When we go to look at how things are done overseas, we can't look at it from our own point of view as we do in the West. We have to look at it as, hey, this is just the way the culture is. The problem is when some of these tribal folks come to the West, they may be physically in the West, but they still function as if they're overseas and they're still living in the tribal culture environment. So you do see that happen in the Western society, but it's typically first generation immigrants that may have been here 20, 30 years, but they may be physically here, as I said, but mentally they're still living overseas.